The Cricket on the Hearth by Charles Dickens, Chirp the Third. The Dutch clock in the corner struck 10 when the carrier sat down by his fireside, so troubled and grief-worn that he seemed to scare the cuckoo, who, having out his 10 melodious announcements, as short as possible, plunged back into the Moorish palace again and clapped his little door behind him, as if the unwanted spectacle were too much for his feelings. If the little haymaker had been armed with the sharpest of scythes, and had cut every stroke into the carrier's heart, he never could have gashed and wounded it as Dot had done. It was a heart so full of love for her, so bound up and held together by innumerable threads of winning remembrance, spun from the daily working of her many qualities of endearment. It was a heart in which she had enshrined herself so gently and so closely, a heart so single and so earnest in its truth, so strong in right, so weak in wrong, that it could cherish neither passion nor revenge at first, and had only room to hold the broken image of its idol. But slowly, as the carrier sat brooding on his hearth, now cold and dark, other and fiercer thoughts began to rise within him, as an angry wind comes rising in the night. The stranger was beneath his outage roof. 3 steps would take him to his chamber door. 1 blow would beat it in. "You might do murder before you know it," Tackleton had said. How could it be murder if he gave the villain time to grapple with him hand to hand? He was the younger man. It was an ill-timed thought, bad for the dark mood of his mind. It was an angry thought, goading him to some avenging act that should change the cheerful house into a haunted place, which lonely travelers would dread to pass by night, and where the timid would see shadows struggling in the ruined windows when the moon was dim, and hear wild noises in the stormy weather. He was the younger man, yes, some lover who had won the heart that he had never touched, some lover of her early choice, of whom she had thought and dreamed, for whom she had pined and pined, when he had fancied her so happy by his side. Oh, agony to think of it! She had been above the stairs with the baby, getting it to bed, as he sat brooding on the hearth. She came close beside him, without his knowledge, in the turning of the rack of his great misery. He lost all other sounds, and put her little stool at his feet. He only knew it when he felt her hand upon his own, and saw her looking up into his face. With wonder? No. It was his first impression, and he was fain to look at her again to set it right. No, not with wonder, with an eager and inquiring look, but not with wonder. At first, it was alarmed and serious. Then it changed into a strange, wild, dreadful smile of recognition of his thoughts. Then there was nothing but her clasped hands on her brow, and her bent head and falling hair. Though the power of omnipotence had been his wield at that moment, he had too much of its diviner property of mercy in his breast to have turned 1 feather's weight of it against her. But he could not bear to see her crouching down upon the little seat where he had often looked on her with love and pride, so innocent and gay. And when she rose and left him, sobbing as she went, he felt it a relief to have the vacant place beside him rather than her so long cherished presence. This in itself was anguish keener than all, reminding him how desolate he was become, and how the great bond of his life was rent asunder. The more he felt this, and the more he knew, he could have better borne to see her lying prematurely dead before him, with her little child upon her breast. The higher and the stronger rose his wrath against his enemy. He looked about him for a weapon. There was a gun hanging on the wall. He took it down and moved a pace or two toward the door of the perfidious stranger's room. He knew the gun was loaded. Some shadowy idea that it was just to shoot this man, like a wild beast, seized him and dilated in his mind until it grew into a monstrous demon in complete possession of him, casting out all milder thoughts and setting up its undivided empire. That phrase is wrong, not casting out his milder thoughts, but artfully transforming them, changing them into scourges to drive him on. Turning water into blood, love into hate, gentleness into blind ferocity, her image sorrowing, humbled, but still pleading to his tenderness and mercy with resistless power, never left his mind, but, staying there, it urged him to the door, raised the weapon to his shoulder, fitted and nerved his finger to the trigger, and cried, "Kill him," in his bed. He reversed the gun to beat the stock upon the door. He already held it lifted in the air. Some indistinct design was in his thoughts of calling out to him to fly, for God's sake, by the window, when suddenly the struggling fire illuminated the whole chimney with a glow of light, and the cricket on the hearth began to chirp. No sound he could have heard, no human voice, not even hers, could so have moved and softened him. The artless words in which she had told him of her love for this same cricket were once more freshly spoken. Her trembling, earnest manner at the moment was again before him. Her pleasant voice, oh, what a voice it was for making household music at the fireside of an honest man, thrilled through and through his better nature, and awoke it into life and action. He recoiled from the door like a man walking in his sleep, awakened from a frightful dream, and put the gun aside. Clasping his hands before his face, he sat down again beside the fire and found relief in tears. The cricket on the hearth came out into the room and stood in fairy shape before him. "I love it," said the fairy voice, repeating what he well remembered. For many times I have heard it, and many thoughts its harmless music has given me. "She said so," cried the carrier. "True. This has been a happy home, John, and I love the cricket for its sake." "It has been, heaven knows," returned the carrier. "She made it happy always, until now." "So gracefully, sweet-tempered, so domestic, joyful, busy, and light-hearted," said the voice. "Otherwise I never could have loved her as I did," returned the carrier. The voice, correcting him, said, "Do." The carrier repeated, "As I did," but not firmly. His faltering tongue resisted his control, and would speak in its own way, for itself and him. The figure, in an attitude of invocation, raised its hand and said, "Upon your own hearth." "The hearth she has blighted," imposed the carrier. "The hearth she has how often blessed and brightened," said the cricket. "The hearth which, but for her, were only a few stones and bricks and rusty bars, but which has been, through her, the altar of your home, on which you have nightly sacrificed some petty passion, selfishness, or care, and offered up the homage of a tranquil mind, a trusting nature, and an overflowing heart, so that the smoke from the poor chimney has gone upward with a better fragrance than the richest incense that is burned before the richest shrines in all the gaudy temples of the world. Upon your own hearth in its quiet sanctuary, surrounded by its gentle influences and associations, hear her, hear me, hear everything that speaks the language of your heart and home." "And pleads for her?" inquired the carrier. "All things that speak the language of your heart and home must plead for her," returned the cricket, "for they speak the truth." She sat plying her needle before the fire and singing to herself. Such a blithe, thriving, steady little dot. The fairy figures turned upon him all at once, by one consent, with one prodigious, concentrated stare, and seemed to say, "Is this the light wife you are mourning for?" There were sounds of gaiety outside, musical instruments and noisy tongues and laughter. A crowd of young merrymakers came pouring in, among whom were May Fielding and a score of pretty girls. Dot was the fairest of them all. As young as any of them, too. They came to summon her to join their party. It was a dance. If every little foot were made for dancing, hers was surely. But she laughed and shook her head and pointed to her cookery on the fire and her table ready spread with an exulting defiance that rendered her more charming than she was before, and so she merrily dismissed them, nodding to her would-be partners one by one as they passed out, with a comical indifference enough to make them go and drown themselves immediately if they were her admirers, and they must have been so, more or less. They couldn't help it. And yet indifference was not her character. Oh no, for presently there came a certain carrier to the door, and bless her, what a welcome she bestowed upon him! Again the staring figures turned upon him all at once and seemed to say, "Is this the wife who has forsaken you?" A shadow fell upon the mirror, or the picture, call it what you will, a great shadow of the stranger, as he first stood underneath their roof, covering its surface and blotting out all other objects. But the nimble fairies worked like bees to clear it off again, and Dot again was there, still bright and beautiful, rocking her little baby in its cradle, singing to it softly, and resting her hand upon a shoulder which had its counterpart in the musing figure by which the fairy cricket stood. The night, I mean the real night, not going by fairy clocks, was wearing now, and in this stage of the cricket's thoughts, or the carrier's thoughts, the moon burst out and shone brightly in the sky. Perhaps some calm and quiet light had risen also in his mind, and he could think more soberly of what had happened. Although the shadow of the stranger fell at intervals upon the glass, always distinct and big and thoroughly defined, it never fell so darkly as at first. Whenever it appeared, the fairies uttered a general cry of consternation, and plied their little arms and legs with inconceivable activity to rub it out. And whenever they got at Dot again, they showed her to him once more, bright and beautiful. They cheered in the most inspiring manner. The fairies were prodigiously excited when they showed her, with the baby, gossiping among a knot of sage old matrons, and affecting to be wondrously old and matronly herself, leaning on a staid, demure old way upon her husband's arm, attempting, she, such a bud of a little woman, to convey the idea of having abjured the vanities of the world in general, and of being the sort of person to whom it was no novelty at all to be a mother. Yet in the same breath they showed her laughing at the carrier for being awkward, and pulling up his shirt collar to make him smart, and mincing merrily about that very room to teach him how to dance. They turned and stared immensely at him when they showed her with the blind girl, for though she carried cheerfulness and animation with her wheresoever she went, she bore these influences into Caleb Plummer's home, heaped up and running over, and once again they looked upon him all at once, appealingly, and seemed to say, while some among them nestled in her dress and fondled her, "Is this the wife who has betrayed your confidence?" Thus the night passed. The moon went down, the stars grew pale, the cold day broke, the sun rose. The carrier still sat musing in the chimney corner. He had sat there with his head upon his hands all night. All night the faithful cricket had been chirping on the hearth. He rose up when it was broad day and washed and dressed himself. He couldn't go about his customary cheerful avocations. He wanted the spirit for them, but it mattered the less that it was Tackleton's wedding day, and he had arranged to make his rounds by proxy. He had thought to have gone merrily to church with Dot, but such plans were at an end. It was their own wedding day, too. Ah, how little he had looked for such a close to such a year. The carrier expected that Tackleton would pay him an early visit, and he was right. He had not walked to and from before his own door many minutes when he saw the toy merchant coming in his chaise along the road. As the chaise drew nearer, he perceived that Tackleton was dressed out sprucely for his marriage, and that he had decorated his horse's head with flowers and favors. The horse looked much more like a bridegroom than Tackleton, whose half-closed eye was more disagreeably expressive than ever. But the carrier took little heed of this. His thoughts had other occupation. "John Peerybingle," said Tackleton, with an air of condolence, "my good fellow, how do you find yourself this morning?" "I have had but a poor night, Master Tackleton," returned the carrier, shaking his head. for I have been a good deal disturbed in my mind, but it's over now. Can you spare me half an hour or so for some private talk?" "I came on purpose," returned Tackleton, alighting. "Never mind the horse. He'll stand quite enough with the reins over this post, if you'll give him a mouthful of hay." The carrier, having brought it from the stable and set it before him, they turned into the house. "You are not married before noon," he said, "I think." "No," answered Tackleton. Plenty of time. When they entered the kitchen, Tilly Slowboy was rapping at the stranger's door, which was only removed from it by a few steps. One of her very red eyes, for Tilly had been crying all night long because her mistress cried, was at the keyhole. She was knocking very loud and seemed frightened. "If you please, I can't make nobody hear," said Tilly, looking round. "I hope nobody ain't gone and been died, if you please." The philanthropic wish Miss Slowboy emphasized with various new raps and kicks at the door, which led to no result whatever. "Shall I go?" said Tackleton. "It's curious." The carrier, who had turned his face to the door, signed to him to go if he would. So Tackleton went to Tilly Slowboy's relief, and he too kicked and knocked, and he too failed to get the least reply. But he thought of trying the handle of the door, and as it opened easily, he peeped in, went in, and soon came running out again. "John Peerybingle," said Tackleton in his ear, "I hope there has been nothing rash in the night." The carrier turned upon him quickly. "Because he's gone," said Tackleton. "And the window's open. I don't see any marks, to be sure. It's almost on a level with the garden. But I was afraid there might have been some scuffle, eh?" He nearly shut up the expressive eye altogether. He looked at him so hard, and he gave his eye and his face and his whole person a sharp twist, as if he would have screwed the truth out of him. "Make yourself easy," said the carrier. "He went into that room last night, without harm in a word or deed from me, and no one has entered it since. He is away of his own free will. I'd go out gladly at that door, and beg my bread from house to house for life, if I could so change the past that he had never come. But he has come and gone, and I have done with him." "Oh, well, I think he has got off pretty easy," said Tackleton, taking a chair. The sneer was lost upon the carrier, who sat down too, and shaded his face with his hand for some little time before proceeding. "You showed me last night," he said at length, my wife that I love secretly and tenderly," insinuated Tackleton, "conniving at that man's disguise, and giving him opportunities of meeting her alone. I think there's no sight I wouldn't have rather seen than that. I think there's no man in the world I wouldn't have rather had to show it me." "I confess to having had my suspicions always," said Tackleton, "and that has made me objectionable here, I know." "But you did not show it me," pursued the carrier, not minding him. "And as you saw her, my wife that I love," his voice and his hand grew steadier and firmer as he repeated these words, evidently in pursuance of a steadfast purpose. "As you saw her at this disadvantage, it is right and just that you should also see with my eyes, and look into my breast, and know what my mind is upon the subject. For it's settled," said the carrier, regarding him now all attentively, "and nothing can shake it now." Tackleton muttered a few general words of assent about its being necessary to vindicate something or other, but he was overawed by the manner of his companion. Plain and unpolished as it was, it had a something dignified and noble about it, which nothing but the soul of a generous honor dwelling in the man could have imparted. I'm a plain and rough man," pursued the carrier, "with very little to recommend me. I am not a clever man, as you very well know. I am not a very young man. I loved my little Dot because I had seen her grow up from a child in her father's house, because I knew how precious she was, because she had been my life for years and years. There's many men I can't compare with, who never could have loved my little Dot like me, I think." He paused and softly beat the ground a short time with his foot before resuming. "I often thought that though I wasn't good enough for her, I should have made her a kind husband, and perhaps know her value better than another. And in this way I reconciled it to myself, and came to think it might be possible that we should be married, and in the end it came about, and we were married." "Ha!" said Thistleton, with a significant shake of his head. "I studied myself. I had had experience of myself. I knew how much I loved her, and how happy I should be," pursued the carrier. "But I had not, I feel it now, sufficiently considered her." "To be sure," said Tackleton. "Giddiness, frivolity, fickleness, love, and admiration not considered, all left out of sight. Ha!" "You had best not interrupt me," said the carrier with some sternness, "till you understand me. And you're wide of doing so. If yesterday I'd have struck that man down at a blow who dared to breathe a word against her today, I'd set my foot upon his face if he was my brother." The toy maker gazed at him in astonishment. He went on in a softer tone. "Did I consider," said the carrier, "that I took her at her age, and with her beauty from her young companions, and the many secrets of which she was the ornament, in which she was the brightest little star that ever shone, to shut her from day to day in my dull house, and keep my tedious company? Did I consider how little suited I was to her sprightly humour, and how wearisome a plodding man like me must be to one of her quick spirit? Did I consider that it was no merit in me, or claim in me, that I loved her when everybody must who knew her? Never. I took advantage of her hopeful nature and her cheerful disposition, and I married her. I wish I never had, for her sake, not for mine." The toy merchant gazed at him without winking. Even the half-shut eye was open now. "Heaven bless her," said the carrier, "for the cheerful constancy with which she has tried to keep the knowledge of this from me, and heaven help me that in my poor slow mind I have found it out before. Poor child, poor Dot. I not to find it out, who have seen her eyes fill with tears when such a marriage as her own was spoken of, I who have seen the secret trembling of her lips 100 times, and never suspected it till last night, poor girl, that I could ever hope she would be fond of me, that I could ever believe she was." "She made a show of it," said Tackleton. "She made such a show of it, that to tell you the truth, it was the origin of my misgivings." And here he asserted the superiority of May Fielding, who certainly made no sort of show of being fond of him. "She has tried," said the poor carrier with greater emotion than he had exhibited yet. "I only now begin to know how hard she has tried to be my dutiful and zealous wife, how good she has been, how much she has done, how brave and strong a heart she has. Let the happiness I have known under this roof bear witness. It will be some help and comfort to me when I am here alone." "Here alone?" said Tackleton. "Oh, then you do mean to take some notice of this." "I mean," repeated the carrier, "to do her the greatest kindness, and make her the best reparation in my power. I can release her from the daily pain of an unequal marriage, and the struggle to conceal it. She shall be as free as I can render her." "Make her reparation!" exclaimed Tackleton, twisting and turning his great ears with his hands. "There must be something wrong here. You didn't say that, of course." The carrier set his grip upon the collar of the toy merchant and shook him like a reed. "Listen to me," he said, "and take care that you hear me right. Listen to me. Do I speak plainly?" "Very plainly indeed," answered Tackleton. "As if I meant it?" "Very much as if you meant it." "I sat upon the hearth last night, all night," exclaimed the carrier, "on the spot where she had often sat beside me, with her sweet face looking into mine. I called up her whole life day by day. I had her dear self in its every passage in review before me, and upon my soul she is innocent if there is one to judge the innocent and guilty. Staunch cricket on the hearth, loyal household fairies. Passion and distrust have left me, said the carrier, and nothing but my grief remains. In an unhappy moment, some old lover, better suited to her tastes and years than I, forsaken perhaps for me against her will, returned. In an unhappy moment, taken by surprise and wanting time to think of what she did, she made herself a party to his treachery by concealing it. Last night, when she saw him, in the interview we witnessed, it was wrong. But otherwise than this, she is innocent, if there is truth on earth. If that is your opinion, Tackleton began. So let her go, pursued the carrier. Go with my blessing, and for many happy hours she has given me, and my forgiveness of any pang she has caused me. Let her go, and have the peace of mind I wish her. She'll never hate me. She'll find that I remember her and loved her to the last. This is the end of what you showed me. Now it's over. Oh, no, John, it's not over. Do not say it's over yet, not quite. I have heard your noble words. I could not steal away, pretending to be ignorant of what has affected me with such deep gratitude. Do not say it's over till the clock has struck again. Oh, and this is his wife, so she says, Oh, no, John, it's not over. Do not say it's over, not quite yet. I have heard your noble words. I could not steal away, pretending to be ignorant of what has affected me with such deep gratitude. Do not say it's over till the clock has struck again. She had entered shortly after Tackleton and had remained there. She never looked at Tackleton, but fixed her eyes upon her husband. But she kept away from him, setting as wide a space as possible between them, and though she spoke with most impassioned earnestness, she went no nearer to him even then. How different in this from her old self. No hand can make the clock which will strike again for me the hours that are gone, replied the carrier with a faint smile. But let it be so, if you will, my dear. It will strike soon. It's of little matter what we say. I'd try to please you in a harder case than that. Well, muttered Tackleton, I must be off, for when it strikes again, it will be necessary for me to be upon my way to church. Good morning, John Peerybingle. I'm sorry to be deprived of the pleasure of your company. Sorry for the loss and the occasion of it, too. I have spoken plainly, said the carrier, accompanying him to the door. Oh, quite. And you'll remember what I have said. Why, if you compel me to make the observation, said Tackleton previously, taking the precaution of getting into his chaise, I must say that it was so very unexpected that I'm far from being likely to forget it. The better for us both, returned the carrier. Goodbye, I give you joy. I wish I could give it to you, said Tackleton, as I can't, thank ye. Between ourselves, as I told you before, I don't much think I shall have the less joy in my married life because May has been too officious about me and too demonstrative. Goodbye. Take care of yourself. His little wife sobbed piteously, but often dried her eyes and checked herself to say how good he was, how excellent he was, and once or twice she laughed so heartily, triumphantly, and incoherently, still crying all the time, that Tilly was quite horrified. Oh, if you please don't, said Tilly. It's enough to dead and bury the baby, so it is, if you please. Will you bring him sometimes to see his father, Tilly? Inquired her mistress, drying her eyes. When I can't live here and have gone to my old home. Oh, if you please don't, cried Tilly, throwing back her head and bursting out into a howl. She looked at the moment uncommonly like Boxer. Oh, if you please don't. Oh, what has everybody gone and been and done, with everybody making everybody else so wretched? Oh! The soft-hearted slow boy tailed off at this juncture into such a deplorable howl, the more tremendous from its long suppression, that she must infallibly have awakened the baby. Mary, said Bertha. "Not at the marriage." "I told her you would not be there, Mum," whispered Caleb. "I heard as much last night. But bless you," said the little man, taking her tenderly by both hands, "I don't care for what they say. I don't believe them. There ain't much of me, but that little should be torn to pieces sooner than I'd trust a word against you. He put his arms about her neck and hugged her as a child might have hugged one of his own dolls. "Bertha couldn't stay at home this morning," said Caleb. "She was afraid, I know, to hear the bells ring, and couldn't trust herself to be so near them on their wedding day. So we started in good time and came here. I have been thinking of what I have done," said Caleb after a moment's pause. "I have been blaming myself till I hardly knew what to do or where to turn for the distress of mind I have caused her. And I've come to the conclusion that I'd better, if you'll stay with me, Mum, the while, tell her the truth. You'll stay with me the while?" he inquired, trembling from head to foot. "I don't know what effect it may have upon her. I don't know what she'll think of me. I don't know that she'll ever care for her father afterwards. But it's best for her that she should be undeceived, and I must bear the consequences as I deserve." "Mary," said Bertha, "where is your hand? Ah, here it is." Pressing it to her lips with a smile and drawing it through her arm. "I heard them speaking softly among themselves last night, of some blame against you. They were wrong." The carrier's wife was silent. Caleb answered for her. "They were wrong," he said. "I knew it," cried Bertha. "I told them so. I scorned to hear a word. Blame her with justice." She pressed the hand between her own and the soft cheek against her face. "No, I am not so blind as that." Her father went on one side of her, while Dot remained upon the other, holding her hand. "I know you all," said Bertha, "better than you think, but none so well as her, not even you, father. There is nothing half so real and so true about me as she is. If I could be restored to sight this instant, and not a word was spoken, I could choose her from a crowd, my sister." "Bertha, my dear," said Caleb, "I have something on my mind I want to tell you, while we three are alone. Hear me kindly. I have a confession to make to you, my darling." "A confession, father?" "I have wandered from the truth and lost myself, my child," said Caleb, with a pitiable expression on his bewildered face. "I have wandered from the truth, intending to be kind to you, and have been cruel." She turned her wonder-stricken face toward him. "Cruel?" "He accuses himself too strongly, Bertha," said Dot. "You'll say so presently. You'll be the first to tell him so." "He cruel to me?" said Bertha, with a smile of incredulity. "Not meaning it, my child," said Caleb, "but I have been, though. I never suspected it till yesterday. My dear blind daughter, hear me and forgive me. The world you live in, heart of mine, doesn't exist as I have represented it. The eyes you have trusted have been false to you." She turned her wonder-stricken face toward him still, but drew back and clung closer to her friend. "Your road in life was rough, my poor one," said Caleb, "and I meant to smooth it for you. I have altered objects, changed characteristics of people, invented many things that never have been to make you happier. I have had concealments from you, put deceptions on you, God forgive me, and surrounded you with fancies. But living people are not fancies," she said hurriedly, and turning very pale and still retiring from him. "You can't change them." "I have done so, Bertha," pleaded Caleb. "There is one person that you know, my dear." "Oh, father, why do you say I know?" she answered in a tone of keen reproach. "What and whom do I know? I who have no leader. I so miserably blind." In the anguish of her heart, she stretched out her hands, as if she were groping her way, then spread them in a manner most forlorn and sad upon her face. "The marriage that takes place today," said Caleb, is with a stern, sordid, grinding man, a hard master to you and me, my dear, for many years, ugly in his looks and in his nature, cold and callous always, unlike what I have painted him to you in everything, my child, in everything. Oh, why? Cried the blind girl, tortured as it seemed almost beyond endurance. Why did you ever do this? Why did you fill my heart so full and then come in like death and tear away the objects of my love? Oh, heaven, how blind I am, how helpless and alone! Her afflicted father hung his head and offered no reply, but in his penitence and sorrow. She had been but a short time in this passion of regret, when the cricket on the hearth, unheard by all but her, began to chirp, not merrily, but in a low, faint, sorrowing way. It was so mournful that her tears began to flow, and when the presence which had been beside the carrier all night appeared behind her, pointing to her father, they fell down like rain. She heard the cricket voice more plainly soon, and was conscious, through her blindness, of the presence hovering about her father. Mary, said the blind girl, tell me what my home is, what it truly is. It is a poor place, Bertha, very poor and bare indeed. The house will scarcely keep out wind and rain another winter. It is so roughly shielded from the weather, Bertha, Dot continued in a low, clear voice, as your poor father in his sackcloth coat. The blind girl, greatly agitated, rose and led the carrier's little wife aside. Those presents that I took such care of, that came almost at my wish and were so dearly welcome to me, she said, trembling. Where did they come from? Did you send them? No. Who then? Dot saw she knew already and was silent. The blind girl spread her hands before her face again, but in quite a different manner now. Dear Mary, a moment, one moment, more this way. Speak softly to me. You are true, I know. You'd not deceive me now, would you? No, Bertha, indeed. No, I am sure you would not. You have too much pity for me. Mary, look across the room to where we are just now, to where my father is, my father so compassionate and loving to me, and tell me what you see. I see, said Dot, who understood her well, an old man sitting in a chair and leaning sorrowfully on the back, with his face resting on his hand, as if his child should comfort him, Bertha. Yes, yes, she will. Go on. He is an old man, worth of cane and work. He is a spare, dejected, thoughtful, grey-haired man. I see him now, despondent and bowed down, and striving against nothing. But, Bertha, I have seen him many times before, and striving hard in many ways for one great sacred object, and I honour his grey head and bless him. The blind girl broke away from her, and throwing herself upon her knees before him, took the grey head to her breast. It is my sight restored, it is my sight, she cried. I have been blind, and now my eyes are open. Never knew him. To think I might have died, and never truly seen the father who has been so loving to me. There were no words for Caleb's emotion. There is not a gallant figure on this earth, exclaimed the blind girl, holding him in her embrace, that I would love so dearly and would cherish so devoutly as this. The greyer and more warm, the dearer father. Never let them say I am blind again. There's not a furrow in his face, there's not a hair upon his head that shall be forgotten in my prayers and thanks to heaven. Caleb managed to articulate. My Bertha. And in my blindness I believed him, said the girl, caressing him with tears of exquisite affection. To be so different, and having him beside me day by day, so mindful of me always, never dreamed of this. The fresh, smart father in the blue coat, Bertha, said poor Caleb. He's gone. Nothing is gone, she answered. Dearest father, no, everything is here in you. The father that I loved so well, the father that I never loved enough, and never knew, the benefactor whom I first began to reverence and love, because he had such sympathy for me. All are here in you. Nothing is dead to me. The soul of all that was most dear to me is here. With the worn face and the grey beard, and I am not blind, father, any longer. Dot's whole attention had been concentrated during this disclosure upon the father and daughter, but looking now toward the little haymaker in the moorish meadow, she saw that the clock was within a few minutes of striking and fell immediately into a nervous and excited state. "Father," said Bertha, hesitating. "Mary?" "Yes, my dear," returned Caleb. "Here she is." "There is no change in her. You never told me anything of her that was not true." "I should have done it, my dear, I am afraid," returned Caleb, "if I could have made her better than she was, but I must have changed her for the worse. If I had changed her at all, nothing could improve her, Bertha." Confident as the blind girl had been when she asked the question, her delight and pride in the reply, and her renewed embrace of Dot were charming to behold. "More changes than you think for may happen, though, my dear," said Dot. "Changes for the better, I mean. Changes for great joy to some of us. You mustn't let them startle you too much. If any such should ever happen and affect you, these are wheels upon the road. You've a quick ear, Bertha. Are they wheels?" "Yes, coming very fast." And we will pause there.